Hello and welcome to a fascinating interview with Dr. Henny Klopper. Henny's a very well-known and well-regarded expert, and what he's done is just some remarkable work on COVID-19. The paper that he's produced is, in my view, absolutely up to scientific paper type standard. It's jam-packed with facts. There's very little emotion. Henny gives a nice objective view of the COVID-19 crisis and asks some searching questions. It's not for this format to answer those questions, but the questions are there, and I think you'll find this a compelling read. Just one or 2 points. Firstly, this interview was recorded obviously in the midst of the lockdown for COVID. As a result of that, Henny's interview, his internet quality wasn't exactly up to speed, and now and then his voice does drop away on the audio side. You can still follow what he says, you can still hear what he says, and we just thought that it's so important, actually in the national interests, that this interview go out and that we had Henny available, and he was gracious enough to give us time to use that opportunity, and so we went ahead regardless. The other point to bear in mind is that this is very contemporary. It deals with cutting edge information, and so Henny does refer to numbers and dates which applied at the time of the interview. The interview was actually recorded on the 13th of May 2020, and so he does refer to a newspaper article and a couple of numbers that are relevant to that date, 13th of May. But the gist of what he's saying will remain. So just bear that in mind as well. And then lastly, the website, and you can see the web address over my shoulder, is fast nearing completion. We've got some really exciting developments, and we've been working quite hard behind the scenes to get this website ready. It will be ready on this coming Monday, which will be the 18th of May 2020. And in the meanwhile, I would urge you to please subscribe. Go to the website. You'll see an under construction page there. There will be a subscription link though, and you can subscribe to the newsletter. And what that will mean is that you will then get information about developments on the website, but also important, and there's a key one, about some special offers that we're going to be running in the pre-launch phase. And finally, just to remind you, the launch of the website officially is going to be on the 28th of May. It's coming up quickly, but have a look at those pre-launch specials. We're trying to put together some packages which are of real value and we think are going to have quite an impact. Thank you very much for taking your time. I hope you enjoy the interview. Thanks for now. Good day and welcome to our latest interview. This one's a really good topical one. And again, looking forward to discussing today's topic, which is whether COVID-19 is in fact a disaster as defined by the Disaster Management Act. And we've got the guest we've got with us today is Henny Klopper. He's an emeritus professor at the University of Pretoria, and he's recently written a most impressive article, Henny, I must compliment you, on this question. And that article will be available. We'll put links on the site. It'll be available on my website. You can see the web address over my shoulder. And it will also be available via LexisNexis, and we'll make sure that the link to the LexisNexis article also appears. Welcome, Henny.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, and I think we can go straight in, Henny, and have a look at an article that you tell me appeared. I think it was in this morning's newspaper, which, if I'll just go through that to introduce it, is effectively deals with COVID-19 cases in Gauteng province. But I know you're going to talk and put that within context. But maybe take us through that graphic. It is in Afrikaans, but you'll take us through in English for those that don't speak Afrikaans. But Henny, I'm going to let you introduce it and speak to it.
Yeah, the problem that I have with the situation, the COVID situation, is that the message that we are all receiving is that the COVID virus is a deadly virus, and once you are infected, you have effectively received a death sentence. And that particular bothered me personally, and that's what prompted me to go into them and find out whether this is in actual fact true. Now, if one looks at the situation in Gauteng, this is today's or yesterday's situation, you will see that in Gauteng we've got a total of 1,971 infections. Now, immediately I must say that one must not be misled by the infections number to believe that these are the only infections that are around, because these are the numbers that are produced when symptomatic COVID sufferers are tested. At this stage, there is very little asymptomatic testing being done. That's the first point. And the second point is, although there have been testing, they have been doing tests, and the testing was around about the level of 8,000 tests per day. The results have a lag of about 2 weeks because the laboratories aren't able to process the tests that have been taken, or the swabs that have been taken from the people quickly enough. And that in itself is a problem if you want to stem the virus, because you can realize you've got people walking out there being asymptomatic, and people waiting for their tests that are maybe not being adhering to social distancing measures and the like. But however that may be, you will see that out of 1,971, we've got 58 hospitalized patients, and we've got nobody in ICU at the moment. And we've got 1,343 recoveries, which leaves us with less than 500 people that are infected in the entire province of Gauteng. Nonetheless, we've got a lockdown which restricts economic activity to about 80 or 90%. Added to that, you've got areas within Gauteng, such as the city that I am living in, which has only got 293 cases. And Gauteng, the Tshwane metropole is about 6,000 square kilometers. We've got 293 cases in 6,000 square meters, which makes the possibility of me meeting up with a person that is infected quite remote. Bearing in mind that it's infected people that have been tested. This prompted me to go and have a look at exactly what is going on about with the COVID-19 virus, not only in our country but also internationally. And I started off by looking first at whether the implement of the Disaster Management Act of 2003 was justified. And if one looks at the definition of a disaster in terms of Section 1 of the DMA 57 of 2003, you will see that the disaster has two requirements. The first requirement being that it must be something which causes an occurrence, a human occurrence or natural or human occurrence causes or threatens to cause death, injury, or disease, damage to property, disruption to the life of the community. And the second requirement, and which this is important, is of a magnitude that exceeds the ability of those affected by the disaster to cope with the effects using only their own resources. At the time that the state of disaster was declared, we had only about 1,934 COVID cases in our country. And that raises the question, but is this possible that this act can be made applicable when the threat is not of a sufficient magnitude? And that led me to having a look at COVID by first analyzing COVID, looking at COVID and seeing what illness it is. And if you want to know what COVID is, it's actually a respiratory disease which affects the lower respiratory tract, where the normal flu would, in normal circumstances, affect the upper respiratory tract. It can also be termed to be a sort of a chronic pneumonia. And the other aspect of COVID which struck me is that when you look at the experts, when they explain the consequences of COVID, which is a cough or symptoms that are similar to that of flu, then you will see that they will tell you that 80% of all the people that are infected with the virus, they come by without any hospital treatment, and they use ordinary over-the-counter medicines to treat the virus. That's the first point. So from a serious point of view, which affects the majority of people, you will see that 80% of them get flu-like symptoms. The other 20%, they become seriously injured, and of that 20%, about 10% require medical treatment, and of that 20%, 6% land up in ICU. The persons that are really affected by the COVID-19 pandemic are the persons that have pre-existing health vulnerabilities, such as diabetes, such as bronchitis and asthma, AIDS, tuberculosis, those kind of, and the persons that are really struck by COVID are the persons that are over 80. In England, about 90% of the people that have died, and it's now over 30,000 of them, are persons that are older than 80. So if COVID is a threat, it is a threat basically to persons that are over the age of 17. That includes me, by the way. So I must be careful, but can't see why all the healthy people must be quarantined with the persons that are ill. When the normal person that has been infected by COVID will have an episode of flu-like symptoms and will not require hospital treatment.
Henny, and if I can just make a point on that. So if you're looking at, if your point is that majority of people, the category that's at highest risk are over the age of 70, then obviously there's a very low percentage of those people who are economically active. In other words, that's your retirement years. And the converse of that, it seems to me, is that the economically active sector of the population, in other words, those people up to the age, let's say between the ages of 20 or so and 65, are not at high risk of transmission.
No. And by the way, if one looks at the situation, they are now having a lot of thought about opening the schools. The experience in England is that only 2% of the people infected are children. Less than 2% of children get infected with the virus. For some reason, children and younger people have got a resistance against the virus. So I read a report by an expert in England. He said he cannot understand why the children should be protected, but they're not in need of protection because they do not get infected by the virus. That is another aspect that one needs to keep in mind. So the obvious thing to do would be to protect the vulnerable people. And in our country, we've only got about 8% people above the age of 70. Whereas in the countries where we've got high death rates, you will see that the percentage of older people are much higher. In Italy, it's 23%, in England, it's 18%, and in New York, you've got 17%. In our country, we've got 8% elderly people. So, and recently, what was this morning, there was a professor of KwaZulu-Natal which said, well, taking the figures of England, the lockdown has saved about 22,000 lives, or 20,000 lives. But you can't take England and compare it to us because we've got, the situation is completely different. Uh, to start off, the population density in London and in the whole of England is much higher than South Africa. Our population density geographically as a country is 49 per square kilometer, whereas I think I can look it up. I think the population density in England, in the UK, is 274 per square kilometer, which makes a considerable difference in the way that the virus spreads. So the illness itself would not seem to be that much a threat or death threat. So if you are diagnosed as a positive COVID-19, that does not mean you're going to die. The government's attitude as far as the death rate is concerned is 2%. But if you take it per capita, it's much, much lower than that. The statistics that I have got is that the death rate in our country as at the 8th of May is 0.026. And the percent, no, 0.026. So you've got 0.026, that's what percent is that? It's
no, I'm saying it's less.
If you take the number of infections and the number of deaths, and you divide that into each other, then you get 0.026.
Yeah, but I'm saying that it's 0.026. I'm saying it's 0.026%, right, of the population.
Yeah.
Just to understand that figure. So,
yeah, no,
all right.
The percentage death per capita in our country is 0.0841%.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's less than it's less than 1/10 of 1%. Is that the point you're making?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Henny. So if we look at the COVID-19 morbidity, just take us through those figures. And we'll see that in blue, the reported number of deaths seems to create the picture of a particularly deadly pandemic. On close inspection of currently available information, this is not the case. Global deaths now are up to about 276,000 out of a global population approaching 8 billion. Take the statistics of those countries with the highest number of reported COVID-19 cases. The average case mortality rate is 0.38. And the average per capita rate, 0.0841%.
Yeah.
Less than 1/10 of 1% of the population mortality rate.
Yeah.
Did I read that?
Yeah. That's per capita, which I think is a more reliable figure.
Yes.
Because if you look at the stark figures of, say, 30,000 deaths in England, it seems very, very bad.
Yes.
Because 30,000 people that died. But keep in mind that ordinary flu in the UK kills 17,000 people a year.
Well, I think let's just bring let's have a look at this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we have a look at the outcome of total closed cases, let's have a look at those graphs and just talk us through that, Henny.
Yeah. You will see that the recovery rate of COVID-19 is 83%. So only 17% of people that contract the disease have got problems of recovery or die from the disease. This seems to be quite contrary to the message that we're getting, is that when you are diagnosed with COVID-19, you've received a death sentence. That's not true. It's not.
Yeah, so that
really
certainly doesn't seem to be the case. And if we have a look, and you touched on this a few moments ago, and let's have a look at other epidemics and health conditions.
Yeah. Well,
and the first
this is the main thing. You see, I can't understand why the government is so taken up with COVID-19 if they've got existing epidemics on their hands. They've got tuberculosis, which we've got the highest infection globally of
Yes.
tuberculosis. We've got 333 deaths a day from TB, and we've got AIDS, HIV/AIDS, which we've got the highest population of HIV/AIDS infected people, uh, which gives you a death rate of 42 people per day from AIDS. So 370 people die every day before the 5th of March. That was a situation which pertained in our country. We were losing just under 400 people from epidemics, AIDS and the HIV. And the HIV epidemic is a function of the denialist policies of the Mbeki era. So
Yes.
we've got that with there that we have to carry, and we have to carry the TB the TB burden as well.
So then let's just put that in context. So if we've got just less than 400 deaths per day from a combination of TB and HIV/AIDS, will remind us, what's the daily mortality rate for COVID-19?
COVID-19, it's about 3 or 4 or 5, I think. The count at the moment is 206 deaths from the
Total.
5th of March.
Yes.
Total, yeah.
So the total number of COVID deaths is lower than a daily death of TB and HIV combined.
Yeah, yeah. Far lower than that. And keep also in mind that the ordinary flu caused deaths. We've got about 1,180 deaths a year annually from flu, ordinary flu, and that amounts to 30 a day. So
Yes.
if you compare COVID-19 death rate to seasonal flu, then you will see that we've got in South Africa, it's been 64 days since we've had the infection in our country. And if you divide 206 by 64, it's about 3 a day from the COVID. And 90% of them are people that were health compromised beforehand. There's no guarantee that they would have survived the winter, for instance. So by looking at it like that, it seems that COVID from a health threat point of view is not such a disaster as it's been made out to be.
All right, Henny. So that's the COVID background. Let's have a look. Let's turn now to the measures and what you call countermeasures. So lockdown, social distancing, and the like, which has been introduced in the reaction.
Can we just, before we go to that,
Sure.
just make mention of the H1N1 pandemic that was in the 1914 to 1918, because
that's the Spanish flu.
Spanish flu, as I understand it, that is most of the models that are being used to model the consequences of COVID have taken what has happened in 1914-18 on board. Now, the circumstances in 1914 and 18 were quite different to what we've got now. There was a First World War. They had returning soldiers. We had migrant labor in South Africa, and we lost about 50,000 of our citizens during that pandemic. If you look at the death rate at the current stage, we cannot say that there's a comparable or commonality between the Spanish flu and COVID-19 at present. There were 2 or 3 waves of the Spanish flu at that time, and the second and the third wave cost more lives than the first wave. But keep in mind that the Spanish flu infected 500 million people and killed 50 million people. And at that stage, the population, the global population was 1.8 billion. So just about a third of the world population were killed by the Spanish flu on top of the First World War. So it's not comparable to the Spanish flu, and you cannot say that there are commonalities between the Spanish flu and COVID-19. And on a medical point also, the two viruses are not the same. They're different types of viruses, and they've got different methods of action and causing havoc within the human body.
All right, Henny. So that's thank you. Because I hear a lot. I hear a lot about this. I hear a lot about the Spanish. Benny, I hear a lot about the Spanish flu, and you know there are concerns. I think it's something that and I didn't realize that South Africa was one of the countries that was hardest hit by the Spanish flu, and I think it leaves a deep impression.
Country.
Yeah, no, I think we were hard hit by that, and our model is based on something that
if you can page up to the graphic on page 10, where we've got the global deaths, to just give perspective on globally what the COVID-19 has done as far as deaths are concerned globally.
Mm.
You can see that at that stage there were, as at the 30th of March, there were 35,000 deaths, and the other causes of death far exceed that of COVID. As far as common flu is concerned, the annual death rate as far as that is concerned is varies between 290 and 650,000 people. So for COVID to become a serious problem, we must get over 290, and we are up to about 230 at the moment.
I just want to pause on that graphic for a second, and it's just digest it. So we've got, this is global deaths for the period 1st of March to the 1st of January to the end of March.
January 1st of March City.
Yeah, 2020. We've got 35,000 global deaths for coronavirus. If I then just run my eye, let's leave the mothers during childbirth, because that I mean, it does speak for itself. But I just want to highlight seasonal flu. We're at just a shade under 120,000. So let's say almost 4 times as many deaths for flu as the coronavirus. We'll make it to 3.5 times. And then look at malaria at 240,000, suicides 262,000. 330,000 for traffic accidents, HIV/AIDS, which we've touched on, 411,000, alcohol 612, 1.2 million for smoking, 2 million for cancer, and then communicable diseases. That's 3 million, and then abortions 10 million. Now we're going to turn now in a second to the measures that have been taken in reaction to the coronavirus, but those figures are quite stark, Henny, because it puts the coronavirus in context, and the question that I'm sure occurs to everybody looking at those figures is, why have we had a national lockdown and our economies just coming to an absolute halt for 35,000 coronavirus deaths, when from smoking we have a global death rate of 1.2 million deaths a year, and we'll have a look now in a bit more detail at the measures that have been taken. So maybe, Henny, let's then turn to that, and let's have a look at the countermeasures here. Here it's quite nicely set out. We'll go past that graph, which just demonstrates the earlier one. So, Henny, if we look here, just before you comment on this, just to orientate ourselves, the countermeasures, which is a lockdown, social distancing, and then personal measures, which you referred to. Sure. Maybe just talk to us about those 3 types of measures.
Well, the lockdown is never designed to solve the infection problem. Lockdown is, in the first instance, to mitigate and to slow down the infection rate, to allow the authorities to take steps to counter the COVID infection. So, for instance, to get enough test kits, or PPEs, personal protection equipment, or for them to be able to do testing and tracing and tracking uh, the infection rate being slowed down. So a lockdown will never be a measure that will solve the infection problem of COVID-19. It is just a tool which is used in order for the governments to prepare for the situation after a lockdown and to introduce measures which can uh, uh, cause the infection rate to go down to a level where it's more manageable.
More manageable. Okay.
The
And then
problem,
let's have a look. Let's have a
basic
look, Henny.
problem.
Henny, if we can move on to social distancing. Let's have a look at that one. So we have social distancing and a measure where a physical distance between people is maintained. We're all familiar with that now with the queues and what have you. And reducing the number of times people come into close contact with each other. This measure was employed by Sweden and the Netherlands. The results do not deviate very markedly from the results of full lockdown. So talk to us a little bit about social distancing, please, Henny.
You see, you don't want people to congregate in great numbers because of the way that the virus is transmitted. It's transmitted by aerosol, by droplets in the air, and those droplets falling on surfaces, and then people coming into contact with surfaces and then touching their faces with their infected hands. That's why washing of hands is important, and staying away from other, and the wearing of masks as well, because the mask won't protect you from infection, but it will protect another person from spreading the virus in his in aerosol form when he coughs or sneezes. So social distancing is going to be with us, and that's not an invasive or a very
restrictive,
strict measure,
yeah,
and can be easily implemented.
All right, then let's turn to the next one, Henny, the personal measures. And I just want to draw the viewers' attention to one point that we'll develop in a minute, which is that that the social distance, treat, test, and locate. I've missed that one, and that was applied with success in South Korea. If you'd like to talk about South Korea now, you can do so. Otherwise, we can deal with it a little later. It's up to you, Henny.
Yeah, the South Korea did introduce social distancing, and also did not go the route of a lockdown. Instead of doing that, when people got ill, they would treat the patient, test them for the virus, and then follow up the contacts and isolate those contacts. And if you look at Korea's figures, it's quite amazing. Korea, if I can just look it up quickly, they're a population of 51 million. We are 59 million. They had 10,822 cases and 256 deaths with this method that they employed. And they've got a crater where the economy used to be.
Sure, and well, that's the key thing, and the main way that Korea's dealt with it is through this method of treat, test, and locate. In other words, to identify coronavirus positive people, and then to work out who's at contact with them, and then to deal with it in that way, as opposed to lockdown.
Yeah. And then other countries that also did not have lockdown were the Netherlands and Sweden.
Yes.
If you look at their death rate, it's 0.09, and the death rate for the other countries that did lockdown is 0.26 average.
Right. So
the lockdown did not make such a big difference in their case. I know that there are experts, and I'm not an expert with viruses and that kind of thing. I'm a lawyer. would say, but you can't compare the statistics of countries with each other because there are differences in way that the data was collected and the way that they are reported, etc., etc. But if you want to have an idea of where you are, this is an indication of the fact that the virus, that lockdown is not such an effective way of dealing with the virus. It might have been in the time of the Spanish flu, but as far as this particular virus, it doesn't look to me as a layperson, not versed in epidemics and so on, as if that the lockdown is a good idea.
Okay, let's have a look at then the lockdown costs, just while we're dealing with lockdown, um, and talk to us about the lockdown costs, Henny.
You see, what happens with the lockdown, both sides of the economy are closed. So you've got a complete standstill of the economy. And the experts tell me that that's costing us 13 billion rand a day. So you can imagine that if we had to extend the lockdown, it's going to ruin us if it goes on for much too long. Added to that, that prior to the lockdown, we had economic problems of low growth, high employment, that kind of thing. And furthermore, if you look at the labor situation, there is a projection that we're going to lose about 370,000 jobs. I saw an article in the paper today where there have been Section 189 applications, and there are 3,300 jobs that are on the line as a result of the lockdown. And what irks me most is the fact that the people say, but it's the virus that is causing the job losses and the damage. It's not. It's the lockdown that's doing that. It's not the virus. It's the action to the virus that is causing the damage.
And one of the key points that I'm taking away from this, that your view is looking at other countries, that there are other ways of dealing with the virus which don't involve a lockdown.
Yeah, but you see, lockdown on its own is not good enough. You have to have aggressive and effective testing, tracing, and isolating at the same time. A lockdown is not going to do what you do. I think because the government didn't have sufficient testing kits when the lockdown was introduced, we missed the trick. And that's why, if you look at the graph, you will see that the lockdown did not make much of a difference to the infection rate. We'll turn to the graphic of News 24 a bit further on, and you'll see that there was a gradual increase despite the lockdown. And even after the lockdown was extended, we still had an increase in infections, not at a greater rate than now, but even so, we had an increase. And if you look at the higher number of infections, daily number, you mustn't be deceived into thinking that that's the virus at work, but it is a function also of the fact that there's been more aggressive testing, and that we're discovering more people that have been infected than before.
I just want to wrap up on this discussion on lockdown quickly, Henny, and have a look at so if we look at the real purpose of a lockdown, it's to reduce reproduction. In other words, to reduce the number of people each confirmed case infects. So for each person that is now infected, how many people are then that could reproduce? In other words, how many other people are infected by the infected person, right? And the goal is to keep reproduction, or R, below 1. So R smaller than less than 1, with each case infecting fewer people than one person on average. So in other words, that logically makes sense. You want if you have one person who's infected, you want that one person to then infect less than one other person, and then I would imagine you're getting on top of the infection. or the spread of the infection.
Yeah.
And you see that there
Uh,
two bullet points that you make.
I don't know what the government's idea with our lockdown is, because this 5-stage thing is taken the level of infection in our country is, as far as I can see, to a lay person being not versed in economy, not versed in the health sciences, looks to me like putting the cart before the horses. Instead of having a phased introduction of a lockdown and locking down where the concentration points of the viruses, which is in the Western Cape at the moment, and then introducing measures on a scaled in a scaled way, lockdown with increments,
Yes.
instead of having the whole country locked down.
Where and when necessary, I would have thought. And then if we have a look, this is the graph you referred to earlier, I think, Henny.
Yeah.
And we can speak to that graph, and just it's probably coming through a bit small on the screen. So let me just quickly talk viewers through this. So we have, I think it's the 18th, 19th of March. This is where the travel ban is implemented. The next line is the hard lockdown. The next line is mass public screening starts, and the next one is hard lockdown extended, and then the next one is where the hard lockdown is now reduced down to the level 4 where we are at the moment. Yeah. So with those different markers visible, just talk us through the numbers and how the lockdown affected those numbers.
Yeah, well, you can see that there was an initial reduction in infections, yes, from the hard lockdown up to where it was extended, and then after that, there's been a steady and increase up, which accords with the whole idea of a lockdown, is that a lockdown will not make the virus go away. You need to reduce the numbers in order to get control over it. You have to suppress the infections by taking the person who are infected out of circulation so that they can't infect other people. Having said that, my question is the following: is it such a big deal? Is it such a problem if a person gets infected with COVID-19? I can understand if it's a vulnerable person. I can understand that. But if 80% of the people are aware of the fact that they've got COVID by virtue of because they've got a slight cold or they've got cold-like symptoms, and the other 20% get ill, is it such an economic or a health risk for the health system that people should contract the virus? The experience Sweden and the Netherlands and South Korea seems to indicate that it's not. And now my question is, in our particular situation where we've got low numbers of infections, we are only getting to 10 or 11,000 out of a population of 59 million. Was it necessary for us to be so concerned by COVID if we sit with people, 2.5 million people with HIV and AIDS, or millions of people that suffer from TB, and spend millions of rands, billions of rands in combating this particular infection, whereas we are spending billions of rand combating TB, for instance.
All right, Henny, that leads us now nicely to the next issue, which is constitutional issues. And let's just have a look. One of the points that occurs to me through this whole conversation is the question of proportionality. So what we mean by that is there's obviously been an invasion of people's rights. And the question that arises is whether that invasion is justified and whether the response is proportional. In other words, does the severity of the response Is it justified by the severity of the underlying problem? And maybe just
Yeah.
without getting too much into jargon, you just look at, I
No,
think people understand.
the whole crux of the matter is COVID of such a threat that it requires the measures that have been implemented. A total lockdown of the economy. Now, why does the government perceive COVID to be such a large threat? And it would seem, if one looks at the criticisms leveled at the data that they're using, that they have used the wrong set of data. They've used data from China, the Hubei province, and what happened in Wuhan. And you cannot use overseas data to model our situation. First of all, we are not on the highways of international traffic as far as business and tourism is concerned. The infections in Wuhan and in Milan and in the UK, in London and New York were triggered by the fact that there was free movement from China to Italy, to the UK, from the UK to New York. And the composition of the communities in those areas were also conducive to the fast spread of the virus. And if you look at our history, if you look back, we haven't got a similar situation that we have the number of infections that those countries had. And
all right, Henny, let's just, as we head towards the conclusion, let's have a look at an article we're actually recording this on the 13th of May 2020. Let's have a look at an article that you referred me to. Coronavirus may disappear before development of a vaccine. Milan Research Center head. Just in conclusion, I think a nice way to end it would be for you just to make some comments on that article, please, Henny.
Yeah, well, this researcher in Milan has noticed that the virus loses its potency as they go on. So people that are getting infected now haven't got the violent reactions or the same reactions that the first people had. And it would seem he's arguing that the virus will, even before a vaccine has been found, which will be, according to the reports I've read, will be sometime next year only. The earliest will be at the end of this year. We will have a virus. So,
all right, Henny, just some final comments then, just to wrap this up. So I thank you very much for very detailed and thoughtful and fact-based assessment of what is becoming quite an emotional issue, but it gives us an insight into factors and considerations. But any wrapping up thoughts for you, Henny, for the last 2 minutes?
From a personal perspective, I've got questions that I need to have answered. And those questions I've set out in the article. The first question is, if one considers the origin of the pandemic and its development in our country up to date, can one say that the COVID-19 pandemic is as big a threat to life and limb as would appear from media and government statements? That's the first thing. The second thing is COVID-19 a disaster as defined in the DMA Act? And does the pandemic in our situation justify the shutting down of our economy? And the following question, is the way that the pandemic has been dealt with the best way that it could have been dealt with under the circumstance, knowing what we know about the development and the progression of the pandemic in our country? And the last question is then, what is the best way forward to deal with the pandemic other than lockdown. There was an article and a webinar on Daily Maverick I think it was on the 6th of May, where two colleagues, Professor van der Heever and Professor Mahdi, discussed this matter, and they proposed that we use the South Korea model to take this matter forward and to use the treat, track, and trace method of reducing infections and reducing the impact that COVID-19 could have on our country and our economy.
Thank you very much, Henny. That was absolutely fascinating. It's a topical issue, and I think that's given us all a tremendous insight. Certainly, I know I've learned a lot from listening to you and reading your article. Thank you so much for your time. I've told you I've enjoyed your books, and we'll put some information about the various books that you've written. Very, very well written books on damages, which I use on a daily and weekly basis in my practice. It's very nice to have met you in person, in virtual person, and a fascinating conversation. And I congratulate you on an impeccably researched and reasoned paper, which I think you need to be thoroughly commended on. Thank you very much, Henny.
Thank you so much for the opportunity of putting this thing out there. It's been bothering me for a long time.
Thank you, Henny. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.